My name is John Lobell. I teach architecture at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. This is a lecture for my Frank Lloyd Wright course given in the spring of 2015. This is a lecture toward the beginning of the course describing the background of Beaux Arts architecture, which constituted the world in which Frank Lloyd Wright began his career. In this presentation, we'll look at the Beaux Arts, and then in another one, which you should be able to find nearby on YouTube, we'll look at the Chicago School. So what I want to look at is two background issues, the Beaux Arts and the Chicago School. They're both happening around the same time, but we're going to look at the Beaux Arts first and then the Chicago School. And as we go, we'll sort of talk about why, what the relationship is to Wright. So in a way, so then real quickly, Beaux Arts architecture is the stuff with columns. The Metropolitan Museum, Grand Central Station, the 42nd Street Library, the Washington Square Arch. That's Beaux Arts architecture. And it was sort of the enemy. It was the architecture that was holding sway at the time, and the emerging modern architects were in battle against it. So that's why we'll look at that first. The name comes from a school in Paris, the École des Beaux Arts. Beaux Arts means beautiful arts or fine arts school, and that would include architecture, painting, and sculpture. It was in Paris, and something interesting about it, it was free and open to anyone under the age of 30. Men or women, any country. And America had very few and not really developed yet architecture schools. So many key late 19th century early 20th century architects, American, went to the École des Beaux Arts. And they would typically spend a year or two there at the most. They wouldn't go through the whole curriculum. The term Beaux Arts we sometimes use to mean an approach to architecture based on the education at this school. And then the first important American schools, MIT, NYU, University of Pennsylvania, used a method somewhat like that, they call it Beaux Arts method. So this is very influential. It can also mean a style of architecture that we see in the buildings I just listed, like the 42nd Street Library. And it's characterized by formal planning, symmetry, a strong partie. Anybody tell me what a partie is? It's your basic organizational layout. Marché is the progress from the sidewalk into the inner spaces. Poché is the thickness of the walls. So in 19th century construction, we still have thick walls, and they very much define the architecture. Monumentality, historical styles, usually classical. And an integration of the other arts, like the lions in front of the 42nd Street Library, and rationality. They saw themselves as very rational, very organized. There's a whole history of this, which we won't go into, but there was the original Beaux Arts, and then it merged with an architecture school to become the school that was in effect until 1968. Interesting curriculum. You didn't choose studios every semester the way we do here. When you arrived, you had to pass an exam to get in. So if you went to a strong technical high school or your parents were in the arts, you could probably first day just ace the exam. If not, you audited courses, took private drawing courses, and until you could pass the exam. Then you were in. The first thing you did was to choose a patron in an atelier. In other words, here are all these architects, have studios in the neighborhood. You choose one of those, and you stay with that person until you graduate. You don't change every semester. Very much different from our approach. You move through the curriculum, and how many design problems you had to do was determine how well you did. If you got top grades on your designs, you took less of them. And then you took thesis, which was called the Prix de Rome, the Rome Prize. Now, the way a design problem would work is they announced next week we're going to give a library. That's all you know. You don't know the site, how big it is, but you bone up on libraries. You go in at 9 o'clock in the morning, they give you a copy of the program, you go into a little 8-foot cubby hole, close the door, and you're in there for 8 hours. Can't go in or out. During that time, you whip out a set of drawings. You do a sketch problem. You do the building in 8 hours. You make 2 sets of drawings. One you turn in, and the other you take back to your atelier. And now you have 6 weeks to develop your building. But it has to be within the parameters you set with that sketch. And they're going to put that sketch up on the wall to compare to what you turn in. And at the jury, at the end of the 6 weeks, your project is due at midnight. A little dog cart called a charrette, is where the term comes from, I'm on charrette, comes to pick up your drawings. You're running alongside of it still drawing trees. It's like Pratt students still working on the subway, on the way to their big review. And then a week later, all the work is hung up, and the jurors, who all the old farts in the profession, come and judge them. You're not there. You're not there to say, well, you enter here. If it's not clear where you enter, you fail. You're not going to be standing in front of your building for the next 100 years telling people where the entrance is. You don't need to say anything. It's either there or it's not. Now, here's the trick. Do you want to choose the cutting-edge radical studio to be in? And these guys are going to hate that guy and be biased against your work. Or do you want to choose some old fogey who's politically very powerful, be in his studio? And then all these people will want to curry favor with him and be sympathetic to your work. Very difficult decision. Now, your name is not on here, and your studio's name is not on here, but they can tell by the style what studio you're from. This is the main lobby of the building, and the art students will be sitting cross-legged here making drawings from plaster casts of famous sculptures. Some of the teaching techniques, very much into developing patterns. This is a student drawing of the Corinthian Order, and very accomplished, very technically accomplished students. The favored style varied over the years. These are 2 Prix de Rome winners. This is something very elaborate, palace. And you can see this idea of poche, how the thickness of the wall sculpts the shape of the space. So a play began between wall and space. This is also a Prix de Rome winner later by Viollet-le-Duc, who was a very strong proponent of a new architecture. If you won the Prix de Rome, now, to be an important architect, you had to win the Prix de Rome. That's the best thesis project. If you didn't win, you could take it again next year, and as often as you wanted until you were 30. That meant you were competing with people who have done it 2 or 3 times. So it's very competitive. If you won, you then had to paint a portrait of yourself as about 18 inches square. Of course, you had the confidence to do that. And those are upstairs, lined up in a gallery for all the Prix de Rome winners every year. And you spend a year on scholarship in either Athens or Rome. And you'd be responsible to do a set of drawings of an existing classical building and what it looked like originally. And you were archaeologically strong enough to be able to do that. These drawings were then printed in huge books before slides were used in teaching. So this is a student's imagining. We know that it was painted, we don't know if that's accurate. Most famous building in Paris in this style is Charles Garnier, the Opera. And you can see it's borrowing from French Baroque of 200 years earlier. Here's the grand stair, one of the halls. And these people, while we see a lot of decoration here, they were very aware of what went into a building. So these are the flies for the stage set. This is the seating area in the theater. This is the stage. These giant flies can go up and down for the sets. These are the workshops for making that stuff. I'm sorry, these are hydraulics for sending sets up and down. Workshops are back here. And then this is just the entrance to get you in. And this is that stair we were looking at. 1893 is missed it by a year, the 400th anniversary of Columbus coming to the New World. And there was a big World's Fair, and Daniel Burnham, big Chicago architect, was in charge. He decided the style would be this Beaux Arts style. And Louis Sullivan, who Frank Lloyd Wright worked for, was very upset about that. They were pioneering a modern architecture, and he said, this will set American architecture back 50 years. And if you take his position, sort of what happened. So this is in that style. Anybody know how they were able to build such spectacular buildings so quickly for an event that lasted 2 years? This is all plaster and chicken wire. It's not marble. And they would put up marbleized paint on it. It was all meant to last 2 years. It was one of the first uses of electric lighting. This blew everybody away. 750,000 people came on opening day. The most famous example of this architecture in New York is the old Penn Station, which was torn down in the 60s, one of the great crimes against architecture. This is the main waiting room. This is where you go down to the trains. This is a sort of a crystal palace, iron and glass. And this is the main hall of the Baths of Caracalla. And that's what they used for the style. So here we are, 1906. Frank Lloyd Wright is already doing his prairie-style houses, and they're doing Roman architecture. So there's a real disconnect here. Here's Philip Johnson, and Jackie Kennedy was involved, but she's not in this picture. People trying to save Penn Station, but it got torn down. However, we still have Grand Central Station in a similar style, around the same period. And these people were well aware of the modern world. So Grand Central Station has a railroad, 2 subways going through it, a road going through it, and a dozen skyscrapers sitting on top of it, this red, the elevator banks. This is totally plugged into the modern city. It's not just a Roman bath plopped onto the sidewalk. There are 11 layers going down, all the tracks and subways and services here. Another example is the 42nd Street Library. It's interesting, 30 years ago, this place was a mess. They would occasionally clean it, but inside the main spaces had been cut up into rabbit warrens of offices and stuff, and today we just won't put up with that. So the building is beautiful, in beautiful shape. The inside is looking the way it did when original. Here's the great reading room. Now, in the late 19th century, when this architecture was being built, there are 2 major threads going on. One is the rise of democracy. Now, that's going on since the American Revolution, at least, but it's becoming more real. And democracy is more than just voting. It's universal education, class mobility, enriching of the rights of individuals. So all of these things are on the rise. And here we have an architectural style which is, to simplify, based on the palaces of European monarchs. Well, why are we building that stuff? At the same time, we have a continuing development of new technologies. So we see the first use of iron in terms of reinforcing in modern architecture in the late 1700s. 1851, we have the spectacular Crystal Palace in London, 1,851 feet long, all in iron frame with filled in with glass. So the technologies are there, but as we get to the late 19th century, we get more developments of reinforced concrete. We move from iron to steel and the ability to roll big members in steel, and associated other technologies which make high-rise modern buildings possible. What would be some example of those? To make a high-rise building, you want steel. Get your frame up there and love with lightweight, but what else do you need? Elevator, yay! I don't want to be walking up 15 flights. Elevator, electricity, gas. You need the lighting from gas and or electricity. Ventilating. Pardon?
Plumbing?
Yeah, you don't want to be walking down to the outhouse in the backyard. So all those things are developing and making possible a new approach to architecture. First, any questions or thoughts about this Beaux Arts architecture? Okay, so it's pretty evident what it was. With this still, today we're very admiring of it. Some of our great buildings, like the Metropolitan Museum or 42nd Street Library, we're quite proud of them, but we don't build that way anymore. Last major building in that style, 1938, 1941, is the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. by John Russell Pope.